And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sternovic.
Well, hey there, listener, and welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. I'm so glad you're here. If you ever feel like this podcast is just a little heavy on the humanities side, today's going to be a great episode for you because I'm going to talk science. I'm going to talk to this hot young science teacher, physics teacher by the name of Charlie Smith. I'm really excited about this episode. And what happened was, as I've been recording episodes over the last few weeks, a lot of students have been interviewed, and this guy's class kept coming up. So I thought, I got to bring Mr. Charlie in. That's exactly what I did today. You're going to really find this episode intriguing. Now, here's the problem. Teachers talk too much. We talk so much that we sometimes rob students of powerful learning opportunities. Unfortunately, many teachers still embrace the stand and deliver model. They hover there in front of their students who are disengaged, and we talk. And we talk. And we talk some more. I think it's part of our DNA. By default, we want to elaborate and make sure everyone thoroughly understands. When we're asked a question, we're hardwired to answer it thoroughly, completely. But these very tendencies might be robbing kids of valuable learning opportunities. There's still a need for explanations. There's still a place for presentation. There's still room for inspirational messages. Teachers still need to play these roles and display those skills, but the lion's share of class time should be devoted to student-led learning, and that's what this episode's all about. And listener, this is the trend of the future. This is where things are going, so you might as well jump on board and remain relevant. Buckle up, man. You're going to love this episode. Hey there, listener. Please check out my book, 50 Tips and Tools to Engage Teachers and Learners Daily. It's available on Amazon.com as of late summer of 2016. And also check out hacklearning.org for a cornucopia of teacher empowerment resources. Okay, let's get back to the solutions part of the Hacking Engagement podcast. So here we are in the Room 111 studios, and I'm sitting here with a friend of mine, used to be my student, Charlie. I bet you I've known you for 20 years now.
I think 99 was probably when I came here, so about 20 years.
And I've seen this guy go from being a student to a fantastic teacher. And the reason I brought you in is because I'm recording some of these podcasts, and your name and your class keep coming up. And so I have to get you in here, man. I have to talk about what you're doing to make these kids talk about you outside of class. And, I think that I've been kind of heavy on the humanities side in here. And tell the audience what you teach.
So I teach physics to most of our seniors and select juniors.
That sounds so hard.
From my side, it's one of those things that it was one of the first sciences I actually realized why I was learning all the math. Mm-hmm. And I tell the kids all the time, I don't teach, I play. It's one of those things we just play all day. We come up with questions and see if we can solve them.
And then that goes right into what we're going to talk about. And I want to tell you something right now. I'm going to wager, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to wager you didn't always used to teach this way.
Correct. This is probably...
So talk about your transformation, man.
I taught freshmen to start out my career, and it was very much, here's my PowerPoint, here's, I read your chapter, here's my guided notes for you guys. I would hand it to them, and then I'd stand at the board. And through a lot of our staff meetings and stuff like that, we were realizing that, I taught freshmen, and by the time they got to their senior year and they were using the material, they had forgotten, and they really had no ownership to it. So that's how I started, and it was teacher-led. It was, I had the PowerPoint, so I knew where we were going. Mm-hmm. And I really had no focus on, did the kids want to take it somewhere else? And that's kind of how, I started my career. And through that, it was one of those things, through a lot of conversations. My dad was a teacher, and having those conversations with him, it led to this different approach to how we can make the students actually take ownership of what they're learning.
So it sounds like it was a slow transition.
Yeah, it was one of those things that I've always been different as far as, we give kids assignments and we just grade it, and we're looking for grades to be grades instead of are they learning stuff. And so actually in my 4th year when I was teaching at another school, they kind of went into this transformation and said, hey, we're not going to grade homework anymore. We're not going to do this. We're going to give them 3 tests and that'll be their grade. And I'm one of those people that being a science teacher, I didn't know if I liked it. So I actually did my master's on that study and actually did it and found out that if the stuff I was giving the kids were worthwhile, then the kids that were doing it were the same kids that were getting the A's in classes and stuff like that. So why was I penalizing, or why was I taking points away from a kid that might not understand it at that point? Okay,
so I want you now to describe a typical day in your class. What's it like to be in Charlie Smith's class?
A typical lesson would start out with a question. We're studying the scientific method and something like that, and I give them a question. I say, hey, and a lot of times I make up some story of I was doing this at home or this was happening to me, and I ask the kids a question and I just stop. I think the big problem is a lot of times we'll ask the question as a teacher and then we'll try to answer it for the kid right away.
Yeah, right. Or get nervous when an answer doesn't come right away.
Yeah, and not allow that kid time to think through their answer. We're wanting something to be spit back out. So that's probably the biggest thing that I had to change was once I asked that question, be comfortable with the awkward silence because most likely your kids are thinking at that point. So that's a typical day. I ask a question, and once the question's been asked, kids will start getting into group conversations with one another. If they come up with an answer, a lot of times they joke with me because I bet them burritos all the time. They give me an answer. I say, hey, are you willing to bet a Chipotle burrito on it? And just kind of put into that, are you that confident in your answer? And we'll go there. And then once they have an idea or they say, hey, this is my answer, I say, okay, how can we test it? What lab can we do? What can we bring into it? What, project can you do to show me that this not only works in our classroom, but would work in other places? And then as that question's been answered and they come up with a model, then I add another question into it. Okay, so we came up with this model. Does it always work? And that's kind of my assessment. I'll give them a question to answer using their model and say, hey, does this still work off of what you just told me about this other situation?
So this sounds fascinating. When I think of physics, I think of something pretty abstract, very challenging. So give me an example of a really provocative question that you asked your students.
So what we start with after we get rid of the scientific method, which all sciences really start on it, the first thing we do is one-dimensional motion. I have a car that I place on my desk, and it's battery operated, and I start just letting it go back and forth and tell the kids, tell me what things you notice. And one of the things they will tell me right away is this car's constant. And that leads me into my question. I say, okay, prove to me this car is constant. And that's all I say to them. I say, I need proof that this is. And I give them several methods that they mathematically have to show it graphically and all this type of stuff. Once they've proven the car's constant, then I'll take another car that is the same car and say, well, what do you know about if these two cars were in a race? And then they'll work through that model. And then we go from there and say, okay, if these two cars are constant, can I predict when they're going to crash into each other? And I've led that next thing. And then the last thing they do is I give them a car that's faster than the other car, and I put into the Dukes of Hazzard and say, okay, you watch these movies. Why do we watch race scenes? Well, it's because that one guy is getting into his other country just as the cop gets there, and then they have to predict and actually place the cars down on a track and say this car needs to be a foot ahead in order for that to happen, and they grade themselves, and it's amazing because they know instantly whether they're right or wrong. And I grade it, but a lot of their grade comes into a kid does this race and they're off by 2 inches. Without me ever saying, okay, you can go back and correct this, the kids are like, wait a second, I can fix this. And they'll go back and they'll actually tell me more of, well, we were off because of this drop or we were off or whatever. So it's a question that takes us 6 weeks, and it's just constantly building on what they've already learned and just adding a piece to it.
I love what you just said about the kid saying, hey, man, I can fix this. Now, let me ask you a question that some teachers might be thinking about when they hear this. I think about it sometimes. A lot of times when I get the self-directed learning going, there's some kids that are kind of walking the dog. Some kids that are not productive. Sometimes kids need space to become productive. How do you handle that?
A lot of times I try to keep my groups real small. I basically say if they're in groups of 4, one of them's not working. So a lot of their groups are 3s. And what I've done is I've put a group quiz as part of my lab where the group works. Now, if one of your partners is gone, they're still that group is still working. But that's one of those things that is challenging to get that whole group to work. So a lot of times I will separate a group and maybe give someone else a different question. Say, hey, you guys are working well together, but hey, I got 2 different questions. I'm going to put you 2 on this question. I'm going to put you 2 on this question, so that they have to split off. And I'll usually take those, that 2 students that aren't really working and put them together so that they have to now work together. But that is a challenge, and that's still, I guess, something I'm trying to work on.
And I have to too. But here's what I will tell you, and I bet you agree with me on this. I'm still getting more out of them.
Yeah.
And I still think they're learning more.
Well, and I also think by relating it to something that's an interest to them, I have less of those kids that are just trying to slack off and just let their partners do it because it's more adaptive to them. It's something that they can actually do and get hands-on and stuff like that.
Well, here's another question I have for you. This is sometimes a problem I have, and I'm certain in physics you deal with this. There's some kids, they don't know where to start.
Yep.
How do you deal with that?
A lot of that is where that group. So when I've given, I have eight groups in my typical physics classroom, and I'll do tiers. So that first 5 minutes is that group working together, and then after that we start talking as a big group. And sometimes they'll display whiteboards. They do everything on a whiteboard, and they'll show it up. And at times that group has that blank whiteboard, and some student would say something and say, hey, this is what we did too. And you can see that all of a sudden these other groups were like, oh, that's where we should start. And I'll freeze. I'll say, okay, I'm going to give you groups that didn't have nothing, give you 2 minutes, go get what you can get down, and let them have that chance. So it's always proceeding that, hey, you need that little help. Okay, here it is. Give you a couple minutes. Let's see where you can get with that, and continue to do that. And
it's been my experience that the more practice they get at self-directed learning, the more willing they are to take risks.
Well, and that's part of what I do in my classroom is what you just said, is that they're not used to, as a student, to have to think on their own and have to come up with their own ideas, and actually to have their own ideas correct. They're ready for something to be given. So the first couple labs I do in my class is there's not a right answer, and it's intentional so that the kids have to work back and forth, and they'll argue about some of the things that you can't believe they're arguing about, but it's still going into that fact of, well, can't you both be right? Or and so it's a very low risk start to it, but it is exactly that, teaching a kid that they can dig. It's amazing how many times you ask them a question and they'll forget their other tools that they have. Well, where am I supposed to find this? Well, you have a phone in front of you. Use your Google, and they're just so used to being told that they can't do this or they got to do it this way, that sometimes especially with seniors, they leave for college in a couple months, and it's like you are going to have to think for yourself.
Well, you know what I love about this, and I mean this, and this is, in humanities we'll deal with complex issues like. Today we had a debate over what should be done about Korea. Well, there's no easy answers on that.
Right.
When I think of science, I think of it's right or it's wrong. And you're introducing debate into science. That's so important for the hard sciences. I mean, a lot of times in science, I was kind of like, well, I missed that. I guess I'm screwed.
Well, and that's a lot of times they get words that they think they understand. But once you start making them defend their answer using those words, you find out real quick that they don't really understand what that word means.
No.
And like you said, that there's a right answer, but there's 6 different ways I can get that right answer. Is my method wrong if I still get to the end point? And that's probably the biggest thing that they struggle with, is saying, well, how am I supposed to get this answer? And that's not the real question. It's which direction are you going to go to try to solve this answer? Charlie,
how many kids have you had since you started teaching this way tell you, boy, I like this way of learning science better?
It's one of those things I don't know if I can really count. And it's definitely, the kids will tell you this is different. The first 9 weeks is like pulling teeth. It is very difficult because of what you said. But you get towards the end of the year and you hear over and over, I was scared of physics, but I enjoyed it this year. It was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. I joke with the kids all the time because they basically say that I never teach, quote unquote, but it's that idea that I'm not there to give them all the answers. I'm there to help them find the answers, but essentially they're teaching one another.
Well, something, I think that it's a transformation that every teacher in every field needs to make, I mean, come on, man. They can find out information so fast. We're no longer the gatekeeper. We have to change.
And that's what I've said that many times is can you ask that question that they can't Google? If you gave them Google,
right,
would your test still be as meaningful with or without Google? And I guess that's one of those things I'm trying to get better at is to make those questions.
What's the biggest challenge you have in implementing this style of teaching?
As far as the biggest challenge is to get the buy-in. Once a kid has bought into this, knowing that, hey, I don't care how much I fight this, Mr. Smith's not going to just stand up at the thing and write down notes for us. Then they start producing quality work.
Excellent. One piece of advice for another teacher. Make it for a math or science teacher.
My advice is to try this. There are several courses. It's called modeling, but it is pick a unit that you feel very comfortable in, and you know several different ways to do it. But use that unit so when it goes in different directions, you're comfortable enough to be able to bring it where you ultimately want to go to.
Well, I'm proud of you, young man. You're a darn good teacher. Thanks for coming in.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section, and the first thing you want to do is create a really provocative prompt for tomorrow. Something that kids can look at and think about and wonder and scheme and plan and speculate. Make it that type of prompt. Make it that type of question. I want you to challenge students to offer solutions. This may not be easy for a lot of kids. They're accustomed to having teachers provide them with information and solutions. Forcing kids to investigate in a deep way won't necessarily come naturally, but be patient. They'll get better with practice. Next, I want you to encourage kids to test their creations or their hypotheses. After kids come up with solutions, they must evaluate them. Please inspire students to make alterations to their solutions in the face of objective analysis. Encourage students to evaluate other students' solutions. This additional step will offer new perspectives and inspire future collaboration. And finally, conduct a whole class discussion or debriefing. This is where lively debate and deep learning can materialize. Self-directed learning is the way of the future. Embrace this paradigm and grow your students into independent problem solvers. And good luck tomorrow engaging your students.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesalansturnevant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.